Hello, welcome back to the channel. So in today's video, I'm going to be taking you over a new challenge rift build that I've been working on for a couple of weeks on and off. It's going to be based around using the Golem, as you'll see on the playthrough I'm doing as I'm doing this guide. And the idea of it is you chase elites. You want to group up as many as the blue packs as possible, and then we're going to be AoEing them down as quick as possible. So it's a very simple build to play. Just survivability is an issue. You do see me die a few times, but you'll notice that it doesn't really matter. I'm able to get back up, get back in my golem, and carry on doing what I need to do for the rift. So first up, we're going to go through the skills, what you're going to be taking in. You're going to be taking in Soulfire, Bone Armor, Skeletal Mage, Command Skeletons, and Command Golem. So as I said, the bread and butter of this build really is being in the Golem, but you'll see as you watch me playing, as I go through into the legendary gear, that the mages are very important, and so is the Bone Armor. So going into the legendary gear, what is it you're going to be using? For the first piece, you're going to be using Stern Guidance, which is the helm. Now this one is the one that makes your command skeletons now untargetable, and they also rush and deal damage to feared enemies, and they explode when they get there. The chest piece you're going to be using is Draw Deep. Now with Draw Deep, this one is going to be for your Bone Armor, and it passively absorbs the souls of enemies that you slay, which will give you a shield to absorb damage that you're taking. Now you need to have that absorption in here. You could probably do it without, because there is a lot of one shots in a high rift like this, but I find that this one is great because what it also does is it passively absorbs and applies Bone Armor, which works great with another piece of gear you'll see in a second. Shoulders, you're going to be using Depletion and Renewal, and what this one does is it makes your mages grow in size and strength the longer they are around. So you're going to be fearing the enemies as much as you can to try and keep these mages up as long as possible, and it also increases their damage by 45% for 5 seconds, and that has a cooldown for the mages. The legs, Undying Malice. So here, while you're using Bone Armor, your critical hit chance is going to be increased. Now because of your chest automatically applying Bone Armor, it also applies this, which is great synergy between the two pieces of gear. So for the first main hand, we're going to be taking Wit Bloom, and on here, this one is the one that transfers you into the Golem. It encases you in the Golem and making you immune to knockbacks and increasing your movement speed and reducing the damage you take by 50%. It also gains these new abilities. So you've got a Stomp on the Ground, which is AoE. You've got a Leap, which also does AoE when it hits the ground. And then you've got a Blast, which is like a Fear, which also does AoE damage. And then when you use that Fear, your skeletons will jump in and damage the enemies as well and explode. So there's lots of AoE here. For the second offhand, we're just going to go with Pierce Hammer, which is just going to increase the damage of your skeletons. For the first offhand, we've got Corrosive Slab. Obviously you're going to be in your Golem pretty much all of the time, so making enemies that can be vulnerable so they can take an increased amount of damage is ideal for this build. And the last part of the build we're going to be using in the gear is the Scattered Light. Now this is for mages. Your skeletal mages now become untargetable, and they also cast Hungering Soulfire at enemies. And if you're struck by a movement impairing effect, your mages will actually sacrifice itself to remove that from you. The best thing about this is they are able to move around in combat, and you have one that passively summons every 10 seconds, I believe it is. But if you actually press the ability itself, you will summon 2 mages at a time, and you'll see that as you're watching the video. Now onto the set items that I've been using. So I've been using 2-piece Vifus like I do in most of my builds. It's great, it gives you that increase on Bone Armor in time. Same with a Golem. Perfect for a sort of build where you're going to be using buffs that need to be a longer duration. And then in this set, I'm using 4-piece Banquet of Eyes. So we're going to be applying quite a lot of damage over time things. We've got our legendary gems, which are going to be applying dots, and that works out great. Some of our one of our legendary Paragon is going to also be applying kind of a continual damage and effect, which is also going to be great for this. Now, the reason we're using 4 pieces is because we want this extra crit chance for every conditional effect is being added, which is going to add more damage to our summons as well. I did decide to take in here 2-piece Shepherds for just a general increase in my summons damage. And now I have tried this with just random set items, and it works fine. So if you want to throw in your highest combat rating gear, then do so. it works absolutely fine. There's going to be no problem there at all. It's all about just grouping them mobs together and getting as much AoE as possible into that pack. So going on to legendary gems, there's a number you can take. To start with, you could take things like Everlasting Torment. You know, your critical hits are going to curse enemies and damage them for 6 seconds. I haven't tried this one, but Freedom Devotion, it increases the duration of all your summons and increases the damage done. So with your mages, which are going to be the primary kind of damage dealer in this build, as well as your AoEs, this would be a great gem to take. For the 2 stars, I am taking Pain Clasp, which is just going to increase the duration or increase the damage done, sorry, to enemies suffering with continuous damage and effects, and it gives you a bit of extra movement speed. Viper's Bite, which most of us use in some sort of build now, which applies that poison to targets to damage them over 6 seconds. Mother's Lament, you're going to get an extra critical hit chance for 6 seconds. Morn Skull, dealing damage is going to increase your damage for 6 seconds. Now, Igneous Scorn you can take. It's going to be another AoE effect. Your critical hits, which you will be doing quite a few of them, cause explosions, and they also deal damage to nearby enemies. Volatility Shard. When you defeat an enemy, you can trigger another explosion, which will also deal damage to nearby enemies. 5 stars you could potentially use, and the first one I don't actually have at the moment is Chipped of the Stoned Flesh. When you fear your enemies, that applies a curse, and when it expires, it's going to explode for the amount of damage it took during that curse. Seeping Bile, another poison that you can apply, and it also spreads as the infected die. Blood-Soaked Jade just gives you a flat kind of damage increase and gives you a bit of movement speed. You know, Bottled Hope is going to buff your damage and movement speed when you gain a buff for 6 seconds. Roiling Consequences is going to deal damage. Dealing damage increases your critical hit chance, but it also applies a fiery explosion which burns all nearby enemies. And the other one you can take, which I do use in this, is Void Spark, which conjures a spark that will chain lightning to enemies that you're attacking. The next piece we're going to go into is the Paragon Tree. I'm using Brawler. I actually was using the new Paragon Tree to start with, Slayer, and I actually think in this video I was using Slayer at the time, but since then I've actually switched up to using Brawler and I actually think it's better. So I have nearly completed a 373 using this build, which is just over 1,000 combat rating higher than I am. So in the Paragon we're going to be taking Rugged, which is going to be increasing your size and maximum life by 5%. Then we're going to be taking Heavy Armor, which for every enemy in 5 yards is going to reduce the damage you take, which is a great thing. You want to reduce that damage you're taking. Then we're going to be taking Defender of Sanctuary. When you're attacked 5 or more times within 3 seconds, you're going to gain an Absorb Shield equal to 15% of your maximum life, which is great, you know, protecting us even further. Then we're going to be taking Combat Tricks. While Heavy Armor is active, you can move through enemies freely, and enemies within 5 yards have their damage reduced. So you're going to be wanting to be leaping around, running through enemies, trying to find them other packs. This is ideal for that. And then last but not least, we're going to be taking Combat Expertise, which is going to increase the effect of Heavy Armor from 2 to 3% and the effects of Rugged from 5 to 8%. As I mentioned previously, the legendary skill we're going to be using is Lightning Rod. You're dealing damage to an enemy 10 times within 3 seconds. You're going to cause a lightning to strike them and dealing damage to nearby enemies. Another great thing, more AoE, is absolutely perfect for this build. Now, other things that you really don't need to worry about in this is the cursed properties. I use Atrophied 6-piece, which is absolutely fine. You could also use Lash 2-piece on this as well as the Atrophied, just to get that extra bit of damage out. Other than that, there's not really much more you need to worry about with this build. It's really smooth gameplay. Now the boss does take a little time to kill, but if you do have a familiar that has got the armory passive on it, you'll be able to swap your gear while you're doing the rift. So just before you do the boss, run away, swap your gear to a more kind of, you know, single target gear set, and then down the boss that way. Or as you see in my setup, I don't have that familiar, so it's not possible for me to do that. So I just take that little bit extra time to down the boss, which is still possible. I've died numerous times in these rifts, and I think you'll see the res timer is like 22 seconds, and I've still been able to complete the rift in an easy amount of time. It's not a problem at all. Now, I've really enjoyed this build. I think it's definitely a lot of fun. Somewhat off meta. It's not the usual build you would probably take into a challenge rift. Most people would take in a very high damage build that they know they're going to be able to get through it as quick as possible and kill the boss in like 4 or 5 minutes. Now, being that these rifts are nearly 1,000 combat rating above what I'm at, being able to do this with a tanking build and survive and complete it in, say, 8 or 9 minutes is absolutely fine. I'm getting it done. I don't need the gear, the drops anymore from the Rift because all my gear is fully upgraded. It's just to say that I can do it. So have a bit of fun with it. If you want to mix things up in the build and change a few things, mention in the comments what you have changed. It'd be interesting to see kind of different comparisons of this build. And yeah, I hope you enjoy it as much as I have. Like I said, any questions, put them in the chat or into the comments, and we can obviously go through them and see what things people are kind of advising me to change. But other than that, I think we'll leave it here. There's no need to go through anything else on this build. It is a very simple, fun build to play. I hope, like I said, I hope you do enjoy it, and we'll see you in the next one.